Hello and welcome to Restoration DIY. It's great to have you here and I hope you enjoy the video. In this episode I'll be making a bowl from an oak burl cast in purple epoxy resin. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. I've had this piece of wood kicking around for a few months and many times I've picked it up to start a project, and my ideas range from a simple bowl to a jewellery box using the burl as inset panels, but I couldn't make my mind up what to do. In the end, I decided to keep it relatively simple and make a footed bowl. I felt this would show off the timber in the best way. After marking the centre point and drilling a hole, I fixed it to the circle cutting jig on the bandsaw. I wanted the finished piece to be as big as possible, so the blank was cut with the main burl pattern slightly off centre. At this early stage I was having second thoughts, but after the first cut there was no going back, and the only thing to do was keep going forward. Once the blank was cut, it was ready for casting. In an effort to keep as much of the burl as I could, it was too big for any of my silicone moulds, so I 3D printed one, keeping this as thin as I dare at around 0.8mm thick. This brings me on to this episode's sponsor, T-Expert. They offer a range of epoxy resin products, including this deep pour. There's a link to their website and a 10% discount code in the video description. The chosen colour for this project was purple, and I fully intended to only use alcohol dye to keep the resin translucent, but as I mixed it with a dye I couldn't seem to get the depth of colour I wanted. I added more colourant and began to fill the mould, but it still wasn't right, so in the end I added a small amount of purple mica powder, which did the trick. After adding the two batches, I mixed one more to fill the mould, but first I put the whole thing in a bucket to make it easier to move around. And with the mould topped up, the casting went into the aforementioned pressure pot. I added 50 to 55 psi, and there it stayed for around 5 days. It's 5 days later, the resin has cured, and whilst you can't see it on the video, the purple epoxy is translucent enough to make out the burl underneath. I used the coal jaws to fix the blank to the lathe, bring the tailstock up to security in position. And then with the lathe turned up to around 750 RPM, I set to with a mid-sized carbide, removing the waste blocks. The waste blocks were easy to remove, and with them out of the way, I could then cut a mortise. This was just temporary, so I could fix a 4-jaw chuck in the top and turn the blank around. The resin had been curing for 5 days and it was very tough. The 1/4" parting tool was having a rough time cutting into it. After a resharpen on the tarmac, it cut a bit better and I was able to add the dovetail and clean out the middle. Mortise done, I fixed the 4-jaw chuck in place using the tailstock to keep it centred, and after I flipped the blank around, I set about removing the mould. The carbide was a tool of choice to cut through to the oak and epoxy underneath, though once a lot of the mould had gone, I switched to the negative rate carbide to prevent any shattering and chipping in the resin. To fully expose the oak, I used the bowl gouge to remove a layer of waste material. The freshly sharpened edge moved quickly through the timber and it was doing a good job in the resin. That is until I decided to shear scrape the top edge of the acrylic and I shattered big chunks out of it. You can just make out the damage. Prior to doing this, I'd intended to have the rim curving outwards from a narrower midsection, but now that was out of the question, so I had to rethink the design. Whilst I was having a think, I worked on the base, removing the mould, levelling the underside and cutting the mortise. Underside done, I sanded to 600 grit and added a wax finish. So with the blank turned around, hopefully for the last time, I could begin work on shaping. I was still undecided on what to do with the damage on the rim, so I began forming the cutout to create the foot of the bowl. This was mostly being cut into the oak, so the bowl gouge did most of the work. The shape of the bowl develops as I remove material. I don't have any particular size in mind, it's all about proportions and whether or not it looks right. Now I know that can be subjective, but I think I got this one just about right. Anyhow, I'm going to be quiet for a while. I'll be back in a bit. And I'm back. With most of the shaping done, I had to address the damage on the rim. Off camera, I'd looked for a suitable piece of oak to make a segmented rim, but I didn't have any. So with not many options, I decided to curve the top edge over and blend it down into the lower section. The cutout needed a bit more work. I did this with a spindle gouge, then after a bit of sanding, I reset the tool post and began the hollowing out. The hollowing out was fairly straightforward. The mid-sized carbide cut into the waste material with no problems at all. Not the slightest hint of a catch, so I felt confident I could continue without the tailstock for additional support. In all my videos I speed up the footage in the wood turning clips. This is it at about 3.5 times faster, and this is it at normal speed. As you can see, I'm just about to cut away the centre when boom, the carbide digs in and away goes the bowl. That'll teach me for getting overconfident. I was lucky, the concrete floor was covered in oak and resin shavings and the bowl landed in the middle of it, so there wasn't any damage other than a scuff on the side. Having the tailstock supporting the bowl allowed me to continue removing the waste material without worrying about another catch. The side was still very thick, and I wanted to reduce it to around 8mm to get it more see-through. At this stage, most of the waste had been removed, and there was only the centre support and some final shaping left to do. I whittled the middle down so I could snap it off, then I continued flattening the base and refining the surface. Negative rate scraper took care of the last bit, blending and fairing the inside into one continuous curve. And that was it done. I sanded from 80 to 800 grit, continuing up to 3000 grit on the resin. I cleaned inside and out with denatured alcohol. Then I applied 2 coats of sanding sealer, each one denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Up next, Yorkshire grit, a single application, thoroughly cleaned away until no more residue is picking up on the paper towel. This is quickly followed by the resin polishing. First, Mirka Polar Shine 10, a single coat, thoroughly cleaned away, ready for the next stage. Polar Shine 5, another single coat, polished off to leave a deep shine. And to finish, Hampshire Sheen Gloss Finishing Wax, 2 coats, buffed to seal and protect the surface. That's it, another project finished. And whilst this might be one of the more simple designs I've done for quite some time, I think the timber is the star. The burl looks stunning, and the translucent purple set against the oak just works perfectly. I like it a lot, and I really hope you like it too. Anyway, with that said, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, it really helps the channel grow. A thumbs up will be much appreciated, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.